fast. That's fine.
So good afternoon. I hope everyone had an enjoyable lunch. We are now to our next to final panel, which is really about looking forward, kind of next steps beyond this conference. I'll say a few words just reflecting on kind of the discussions yesterday and today, and perhaps some thoughts about the way forward. We'll turn it over to the Deputy Minister, Dlodlo, to kind of talk about what the South African government envisions for their upcoming presidency of the OGP post the Mexico summit. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for discussion. I think in a lot of these conferences, some of the most useful discussions happen over lunch, at receptions, and the coffee breaks, and there's been a lot of great ideas, and so I imagine this conversation will also continue well after this conference. Just a note a little bit on how far we've come with this working group. Just a quick timeline. In 2011, there was a study that we did with the World Bank on parliamentary monitoring groups around the world. In 2012, we convened leaders of those groups for the first time, and a result of that was this openingparliament.org website. The Declaration on Parliamentary Openness came out of that meeting and future discussions. And so in 2013, the working group was created at the London summit. And over the past 2 years, I think we've had a lot of progress in engaging a brand new constituency to OGP. When OGP was started, parliaments were not part of the governance, weren't part of the structure, weren't included in meetings. So in 2013, we were really beginning engaging a new constituency for the first time. We weren't doing that, however, from scratch. There were a lot of great efforts, particularly in Latin America. Senator Larraín from Chile had developed a regional network of MPs, so there was a nucleus there to begin with. That's now been formalized into a regional network as part of Parlaméricas, an inter-American parliamentary network on transparency, access to information, and probity. But again, in a fairly short time, we've touched a lot of legislatures that have begun thinking about these issues in new ways. I think stimulated a lot of good interaction between civil society and parliaments, and in some cases, in a very short period, gone from just that interaction to a formal process and a formal action plan. So I think we've come a long way as a community in a very short time, which brings me to the Mexico summit next month. So for the first time, there will be a parliamentary track at the summit with a series of sessions specifically targeting the issue of parliamentary openness. That schedule is still, I understand, in the final stages of being released, but there will be 6 panels, breakout sessions, dealing with things such as regional developments, where Mexico is hosting this. There's a panel with the OAS and Parlaméricas on regional developments. There's a panel focusing on collaborative tech development, this idea that Brazil has taken leadership on, and cooperation on tool development. A session on kind of civil society, parliamentary collaboration on things such as action plans. On parliamentary ethics and a number of other issues. I think we now, within this community, have some good models going forward, and just again, a congratulations to the Parliament of Georgia and Georgian civil society for, I think, setting the standard, following on the standard set by Chile on where to take this at the national level going forward. So with that, I'll hand the microphone over to Deputy Minister Dlodlo to talk about South Africa's priorities for the South African presidency of OGP, and then we'll have more of a discussion from members before we get to our concluding panel. So with that, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Scott. I don't know if you want me to go to the podium.
Whatever you're most comfortable with.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Speaker of the Parliament of Georgia, speakers from other OGP member countries, honorable members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and thank you once again for giving me the opportunity to address you. I'm going to talk about beyond Mexico, because Mexico will come as an event. We will have a full year between October 2015 and October 2016, where the bulk of the work is actually going to happen in countries and within the steering committee. And as one of the founding members of the countries of the OGP, we envision that we will continue to inculcate the principles of the OGP: accountability, openness, and transparency in the administration of the program itself. We approach the upcoming Global Summit in Mexico presented with numerous opportunities to strengthen this mechanism. We wish to commend the work undertaken by previous chairs of the steering committee, who have over the past 4 years, a period of 4 years, shaped the pronouncements made in the Universal Declaration into the viable programs we engage in today. To ensure sustainability of the partnership, we're at a place where we need to recreate a universal vision for the program, and this will be a priority for South Africa as we assume the chairpersonship role of the OGP in October. South Africa will be leading during a critical time as we reshape the organizational character of the OGP for the long term. Our interest as a country is for a secretariat that drives the mandate of the OGP as defined by participating governments. This organizational form should be one that actively and directly supports countries to improve the OGP mechanism itself, and one that reflects the intergovernmental character of the OGP, and also one that promotes peer learning and exchange. In this regard, it should be important to seek to achieve more transparency and participation in the decision-making processes of the OGP by ensuring that participating countries are consulted before far-reaching decisions are made that affect their participation in the OGP. For the success of the partnership, it is important that as a collective leadership of the OGP, we make decisions that are premised on the OGP declaration, because the steering committee exists to advance the objects of the OGP that bind all member states. Therefore, making consultation a primary tenet of our decision-making processes is very critical for South Africa. We need to ensure that processes are inclusive, and that as the steering committee will leverage on technology that secures the participation of member states in decision-making. During the initial term of the leadership of the OGP under the leadership of the governments of Brazil and the United States, we witness a collaborative style of leadership by these countries as lead chair and co-chair. As South Africa, we would like to create such a relationship with the government of France as our co-chair. We commit that we will give recognition and respect to the position of the co-chair as was initially intended. This means sharing responsibilities, canvassing views and opinions on decisions before they are put to the rest of the membership, and fostering a collaborative relationship between the lead chair and the co-chair. We hope to make achievements in consolidating the role of the OGP chairpersonship as the champion of the OGP as a sustainability mechanism through improved accountability by the steering committee participating leadership to the rest of the OGP participating governments, and ensuring the steering committee becomes the custodian of process and decisions of the initiative. In entrenching the organizational character of the OGP, allow me to outline key outputs that we believe our term as a chair must be measured against. And this is for you to measure us against the commitments that we make as the incoming chair. Looking ahead, we plan to make more efforts in ensuring that we infuse an African perspective, as well as perspectives of the developing world around these issues of openness, transparency, and accountability. This will include borrowing from existing governance, accountability, and transparency mechanisms from these regions, learning from them, and making them part of the peer learning exchange for greater access and OGP accountability. The second one is that for us it is crucial that we broaden participation. We also look into widening our reach and focus to include indigenous groups, minority groups, youth and women in the developing world, and individuals who are not necessarily tech savvy or have broader access to information and communications technologies. The third point is that innovation methods that explore wider reaching modes of citizen engagement that are responsive to the challenges faced in developing countries, and for further exploration through the employment of pockets of excellence and best practice within governments that are more tech savvy than us, that are high on ICTs, that will be able to impart the knowledge and skills that the developing world would require for us to ensure that the citizens of our developing world have as much access to information from their governments as those that come from the developed world. As we seek to create a lasting legacy for the OGP, it is important that the political profile of the program is raised, ensuring participation and accountability at the level of heads of state, and that the role of governments is more pronounced and visible. What we always see in the OGP is that civil society always has a conference, either a day or two before the steering committee meets. Unfortunately for governments, we never meet. So that accountability amongst ourselves as peers, and also engaging on whether the mechanism actually is as effective as was initially envisaged, becomes a bit of a problem because we never meet to discuss these matters. Linked to the previous output during our 10-year focus will be on mainstreaming OGP in the international multilateral agenda at the United Nations General Assembly and other multilateral bodies. Having addressed South Africa's perspective on the administration of the program as incoming chair, it is an opportune moment to come back also and reflect on our role in cementing a collaborative relationship with the legislatures for the future of the OGP. And basically, this is why we are meeting here today. With legislatures being the directly elected representatives of the people, the OGP stands to gain a great deal from forging closer ties with the working group, because we have commonality in our pursuit for openness and transparency. Having spent this time with you and at this conference, I am more determined that as we approach the Global Summit in Mexico and beyond, we utilize the working group to deepen the exchange of knowledge across governments, parliaments, civil society, and international institutions on the opportunities and challenges associated with opening the legislative processes. On that note, allow me to extend my sincere gratitude to the NDI. Thank you, Scott and Laura and the rest of the team, in partnership with our gracious hosts, the government of Georgia, and the gracious Parliament of Georgia as well, for the wonderful experience in your beautiful country. I take back with me assurances for a deeper partnership as we lead the OGP on a shared vision for a global initiative that epitomizes good governance, transparency, accountability, and a citizen-centered program. Thank you very much.
Great. I think with that, we can move to a discussion. If I may, let me just throw out a few questions to maybe get the discussion going, as well as just a few thoughts on things that were reinforced through this conference. I think something that's been clear from some of the case studies on parliamentary action plans and from the discussion is really the value of cultivating parliamentary champions for these issues. In most countries, progress on these issues has resulted from having a few leaders that have advanced this issue and built broader awareness within the legislature. I think this is of value to OGP as well, because as we've seen with past co-chairs, for example, Indonesia, when there was a change in government, if it's just the government that is leading these initiatives, you have to kind of start over with each new administration. And so I think one of the big values of parliamentary engagement has been the building of a multi-party consensus around some of these issues. And again, the interfactional working group model in Georgia, I think, has been very valuable. I'm also struck, just a note about Cristiano Ferri's presentation and him personally. It also shows the power of what a champion in the parliamentary staff can do in advancing these issues. And Cristiano, I think, has been a leader within the Brazilian parliament. Congress has advanced this issue enormously, and perhaps one working group recommendation for future action plans is perhaps designating or hiring a parliamentary openness officer within parliaments that can kind of help facilitate this agenda as it moves forward. Another reflection just on the absolute importance of multi-party processes. And then finally, just again, the power of a crowdsourcing and the power of the community. When we had this conference of PMOs initially, again, 40 leaders of parliamentary monitoring organizations from around the world, there was a couple research questions that came in 5 years ago, perhaps. You would have responded to that by hiring a consultant, a researcher. They would have made phone calls, done interviews, and spent several months doing a study looking at 40 different countries to see how they were doing that. Instead, we put up a Google Doc with those questions and put it open to the group, and within an hour, we had very articulate responses to all of those questions, just crowdsourced from the expertise in that room. And I think we see that time and time again. And so one issue, perhaps, in looking forward with this community is how do we build that platform and also perhaps a steering committee or broader mechanisms that are sustainable for engagement and actually drawing on the power of this crowd. I think this conference is also a reflection of that. If you look at the banner, you'll see a whole lot of logos, and you'll also should know that there's a lot of people, even whose logos aren't on here, that have contributed to this effort. And so that's very much the spirit of community that I think this movement, this community, this working group has been able to tap into, and I think it's part of the future as we look forward. So with that, I'll open it up for some questions. I think there were a few that came up in the conference that I'll put up on, as perhaps initial areas for a comment, but anyone should feel free to raise issues about how we best move forward as a community. One specific issue has come up about separation of powers and action plans. A lot of parliaments have done their own action plan. It probably doesn't make sense, maybe, for an IRM process in the exact same way to do this. Maybe it does, but I'd welcome that, comments on that issue of how we monitor action plans, particularly as there are more going forward. Another issue was raised about the title of legislative openness a little bit, and I think it was David from France that raised this issue of the legislative process extends beyond the parliament. Often legislation is originating within government. Is there a mechanism? Do they already have a mechanism within OGP for addressing those questions? Do we bring them into the working group, and in what format and with what limitations? So those are a few thoughts that I'll throw out there for discussion, but would welcome any other thoughts or comments in terms of, or suggestions about how we move forward. I guess finally I'll mention that there was an offer by the Serbian parliament to host the next conference. If there are others that would like to also kind of contribute or thoughts about kind of ways of moving forward, that's welcome too. I think one phenomena that you've seen is emerging regional networks in this space. Latin America has been leading. There's now a similar movement, I think, within Central and Eastern Europe. I very much agree with you that a priority needs to be engagement, deeper engagement on the continent. There's been good leadership from CDD Ghana, from the Parliamentary Monitoring Group and other groups, civil society groups in South Africa, and in Kenya and Tanzania, Sierra Leone a little bit. But OGP membership on the continent, I think, is also not where it should be. Middle East and North Africa is a similar issue, I think, going forward. Asia has been doing fairly well, but also is an area where this particular working group could continue to make some inroads. So the floor is open. Questions, thoughts, or suggestions?
I think if I can just add on
Please.
what you were saying, Scott, I think the most important thing for me is that the OGP is centered around people. And the government is not the representative of the people, and neither are NGOs in the bigger scheme of things. The most important people for me who are directly elected, direct representatives of the people, are the parliamentarians. And their role in the OGP needs to be a little more pronounced than we're currently seeing. What we have done in the continent on the Africa peer review mechanism, which is now under review in itself, is that in the development of country action plans, we've fused everything together. There is value in separating because constitutions call for a separation of powers, but sometimes for purposes of finances, greater collaboration, and synergy, there is also value in having a single country action plan. I'm not advocating for either or. I'm just saying that both would have value, because in the case of the APRM, it is civil society, it is government, it is the legislative arm, and also the justice and business that sit together to develop a country action plan owned on behalf of our people that we present to the African Union and that we're measured on, which makes it cheaper for the panel of experts or the panel of eminent persons when it comes to assessing on the implementation of the plan itself. But I'm not advocating for what we have in the continent, because it also has its flaws. But we must also look at how it would evolve if we would have separate country action plans, one coming from the legislative arm, one coming from government, one coming from civil society, as to whether it would be easy for the IRM to make the assessments and to do the necessary evaluation on the implementation of those plans.
I think this is a broader question also within OGP, as the OGP looks to engage broader constituencies, whether that's the judiciary, whether that's municipalities. None of those communities were really foreseen when OGP started, but I think to a certain extent, OGP has been a victim of its own success, in that it's drawn in these other constituencies, which is a good thing. But there are, I think, questions going forward in terms of how OGP adapts to engage them effectively, and whether or not we were having a broad, brief discussion about, separate parliamentary versus government action plans, and the fact that parliamentary action plans have just dealt with more or less internal parliamentary processes, and whether an IRM mechanism with an academic expert makes the most sense when we evaluate the quality of elections or other things, or social issues. Sometimes, it's domestic election monitoring, civil society, or it's a different mechanism than having an academic evaluate progress, which has been the model on the government side. But I think there's a comment here from Honorable Pogosyan. Sorry.
Thank you very much. I think it was very correctly mentioned that, first of all, in many countries, maybe there is a still misunderstanding whenever we're saying open government partnership, because a lot of governments are engaged in OGP and participating, and the difference between this event and just general OGP is that this is related to Parliament. And we need to clearly send this message in many places, because whenever people would be using abbreviation like OGP, they would say that, okay, we have a committee in the government, they have a programs, they're doing something, but it's not related to the parliament. And then, or maybe one or two actions could be there related to the parliament, but it's not separately the platform for the parliamentarians. I think second very important issue, specifically also on the regional network, I would truly appreciate that, for example, with the leadership and this event from the Georgian parliament and also some donor organizations, this idea would be spreaded also, for example, to Armenia, and at least to have these elements, even to Ukraine. As I understand, there are only yet 4 countries in the world who really do the OGP for the parliaments and not for the, in general, in the government. Some donors are not present in Armenia, or if they are even present, they are working on a different directions. Then we need also some words from you guys to supporting them to try to establish and support the local NGOs or the formats or the platforms that can be cooperational. I think that kind of an event would be really good to organize at least public awareness on the regional level that organizations will understand and do. And my last point would be trying to promote idea that the parliaments in any way would push to make OGP part of their own budgets. And at least one day to have a conference when, with the logo of the Georgian parliament, we will see not many other donor logos, but to see the Parliament of Armenia, Parliament of Ukraine, Parliament of Moldova, and others. And the parliaments would be really appreciating this value and have their own institutional presence on that regard and not supported by someone else. Then we will have a sustainability related and to this kind of a format, and the value of the format would become local for each parliament to do its activity.
Excellent. I mean, it is, I think the parliaments that have made the most progress on this have kind of invested strongly in this. The one kind of value that I think OGP brings that's unique to a lot of, for example, something that doesn't exist within the IPU or other interparliamentary bodies, and it's, I think, the same thing on the government side, is it's really the only mechanism right now at the international level where there is kind of an equal seat at the table between civil society and government, or civil society and parliament. And I do think that that brings value, not that kind of that necessarily impinges on sovereignty of government or sovereignty of parliament. But the way the world is moving, kind of that model of collaboration, I think, is important in kind of rebuilding citizen trust. So while I don't disagree with the comments about kind of the importance of parliamentary leadership on this, I do think that civil society partnership is an important component of this going forward. Cristiano?
I'd like to congratulate you both for this effort. Having this event has been very, very important, very fruitful. I'm very happy being here. And I was thinking maybe we can consider to the next ones, even to the regional ones, the open conference, the open parliament conference, to add something more practical as well. For example, we may be in a parallel activity or inside the programmation, we can maybe take advantage of those brains around to co-create things or to improve some of those tools available. I think it's a good way to understand open parliament policies, creating open parliament projects. So maybe we can also take advantage of the brilliant locals we can have, not only IT experts, but people in general that are willing to contribute with this cause. I think it could be a good idea. I don't know if it's feasible, but I think it could be a good point. Thank you.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. I think I didn't mention this, and this is still under discussion, but for the summit in Mexico, kind of working with Codeando Mexico and other groups on a hackathon that would happen kind of parallel to the summit, which not a full response to your question, but an element, I think, of the direction that we would like to go. I think as you see, maybe in the contrast between the presentations yesterday morning, the presentations this morning, there is also a big culture gap, I want to say, between a lot of parliaments and a lot of the NGOs. I mean, one of the reasons why I think dialogues like this are so valuable, but you know, parliaments are inherently conservative. They make one mistake, and it's all over the press. A lot of the civil society groups that approach technology, they're used to doing 100 different projects, and if 99 of them fail, and the next one is Google or Microsoft, they're a stunning success. So there's almost a diametrically opposed mentality between some of the civic technologists and parliaments. And that is a difference in style, a difference in organization of conferences, a difference in attire, a difference in formal remarks. And so I think one of the challenges of events like this, but an issue where we really need to continue to work, is how do you blend those cultures in a way that helps both groups advance the ball with respect to democracy. But hopefully this process continues, and there are ways of doing that.
I think Scott, just to put the wolf amongst the chickens, I kind of understand where the previous speaker was coming from. And we have a similar situation in South Africa, where civil society, by and large, doesn't think that NGOs or civil society organizations are transparent, are accountable in the manner in which is expected of governments and parliament, and therefore there is always that suspicion. Again, we come from a racially polarized country, where the black majority, in the vast majority of cases, I mean, I traverse the country talking to different groups of people, the poor, the rich, and all sorts of things on issues relating to accountability and transparency. And the last mass meeting that I had in one of the cities was made up of black people, and the one point that they came up with was, who are civil society organizations accountable to, if not their donors? And if they're accountable to donors, they would be accountable to donors on the basis of what the conditionalities of that money says or comes with. Whereas governments and parliaments, and this is why I stress the issue of parliaments as well, being part of the whole equation, is that it gives it even much more credibility. I'm not saying that the status within the OGP of civil society needs to be diminished. All that one would call for is for a more pronounced presence and status also of parliamentarians or the parliamentary or legislative working group. Because ultimately the people who go to constituencies to account on anything, even the commitments that we make, would not be NGOs. Sometimes it is not even the ministers. People who go and do constituency work are parliamentarians, by and large. We only go to parliament to account on the budget and the money that has been given to us against the commitments that we make. But the people who are at the coalface would be local government councillors, which brings to the equation the issue of local government structures getting involved as well. Yeah. So I think that dynamic needs to be taken into account. Civil society organizations, an excellent partner for the OGP, but equally, the legislative part, which is this working group, also becomes a very necessary part of the equation to give the whole mechanism, bigger impetus and legitimacy. But I don't want to be misunderstood here to be saying, let's diminish the role of civil society, let it remain as it is, but let's up the voice, the presence, and the collaborative work between all the other actors, including the working group on legislation.
Maybe just to build on that, and then again, if there are other comments before we transition to the closing session, I would just say, you know, I think the civil society groups that have been very active in this community all share a strong belief in representative democracy, and sometimes parliaments wouldn't always recognize this, but they're probably Parliament's biggest allies in society. A lot of the technology is pushing the world in a more direct democracy direction, but I think all of the civil society groups that have been part of this also very much believe in the role of the legislature, the importance of the legislature, and the importance of representative democracy. And there is, I think, an appreciation for the difficulty that MPs often have in going back to their constituencies and all of the demands that constituents have of their MPs. So for that reason, I think, you know, this is an important kind of structure and dynamic to continue. Other questions, comments, recommendations for going forward? Anything from the host parliaments or the co-chair from Chile or from the Parliament of Georgia? Please. Deputy Ward.
Thank you very much. Well, I'll try to do this in English. After attending this excellent conference, it seems very clear to me that no matter how far away or how different our countries and parliaments may be, we all face and share common problems and challenges. People everywhere are demanding more and better access to information from the public administration and especially from parliaments. As I have said here before, transparency is always the goal, but sometimes transparency is not enough. We should seek and achieve openness and also see it as a tool for improving the policy-making process. I think we should apply the economic theory of incentives. Let's support transparency by acknowledging those countries and parliaments that have better levels of openness. I think we should work together for openness, always having in mind that we're all allies in this great task, because as a great American once said, sunlight is the best disinfectant. The Chilean delegation wants to thank the NDI, the Parliament of Georgia, for allowing us to participate in this interesting, thrilling, and inspiring conference. Thank you very much, and of course we look forward to working with you all again. Thank you.
Can I just ask a fellow African from ODEC to also say something about, because we all sit in the steering committee between ODEC and the governments of South Africa, and what it is that we envision for the future between that period of October, the collaboration between civil society, the legislative arm, and the governments, from a fellow African to another.
Oh, there we go. Thank you for putting me on the spot a bit. Well, I think just the fact that South African civil society has been working with government to develop the permanent dialogue mechanism, and hoping that between now and the end of October, we're going to be working quite closely on developing the third National Action Plan. I can't really speak to the engagement of parliamentarians because that's something that I've just learned about now in this kind of these last 2 days and how we can take that forward. But it's definitely discussions that we can continue when we get home and share obviously with the other members on the interim steering committee that's made up of civil society and government representatives. I think that's about it. I mean, we definitely got our work cut out for us, I think. And the time pressures are not necessarily in our favor, but we're going to do the best that we can with what we've got. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think we accomplished a bit of a miracle in terms of actually more or less concluding on schedule. So again, just perhaps join me in thanking the Deputy Minister and on behalf of all of us, wish you all the best in the difficult assignment that you have going forward. And I think all of us look forward to supporting the South African government during its upcoming presidency.
Thank you.
So join me in thanking our hosts, the South African President, and again, just a personal thanks to our co-chairs in this, the Congress of Chile. Thank you very much, and we'll move to our final panel.